I want to welcome everybody to the world according to Benjamin Jeremy Stein. We are joined tonight from American Greatness, Ben Boychuk. We are joined by Kris Ruby. Welcome back to the show from hashtag the Ruby Files, Ruby Media Group. She's broken a Twitter story, and more than broken a Twitter story, but she has her own files that she received, and we can verify that she did receive them. And welcome back to the show, Kris Ruby.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You sound so glad. And of course,
we are very, very glad to have you here.
And of course, this show would not be complete without America's humble servant. He's a multiple Emmy Award winner, speechwriter to 2 presidents, Emmy Award winner, economist, former lawyer for the FTC. He is the Dr. Benjamin Jeremy Stein. We have a very interesting story and a very interesting guest tonight, Kris Ruby. I've known her for quite a long time. She has Twitter files that haven't been released. And I found this to be an incredibly interesting story. And so did Elon Musk. So much so that Elon Musk responded to her on Twitter whether she could bring these stories public. And I saw the screenshot. I was quite shocked that Elon Musk, and I know she has DMs from the person that she actually got the story from for proof. Kris, so that anybody could understand, why don't you explain to people what it is that you exactly have?
Okay, sure. A lot of the files I have released on Twitter in the form of 3 different threads and screenshots. So the first thread, Elon Musk had replied and said, worth a read. And then most recently, he replied to a tweet that some have called it a public ultimatum on Twitter, where I said, can I release the unredacted files, yes or no? And he did reply and say, yes, I could release them as long as employee contact info wasn't in there. So here's how all this got started. There's a whole other team of journalists. I'm not associated with them. They are the official Twitter files team covering this. One of the first things that they shared when all of this started was a screenshot. I believe that screenshot was of Libs of TikTok's account or Charlie Kirk's account. And on the left-hand side, it said guano. So I had been looking into this for guano. Yeah, it was just a weird term. Of course, I'm just focused on the back end. I wasn't as much focused on the narrative everyone else was sharing, but I went back to someone and I said, what does guano mean? The way they used it had to do with some sort of machine learning term, which is something I'm interested in. So then I asked another question, what does training mean, or testing at the top of that screenshot on the back end? And that led me to 1,000 other questions, and that's how we're here today. I know, Judah, one of the things we talked about was why you, and I think it's because I'm just naturally curious about this topic. I've been covering it for a while, and so my train of questions led me in this direction, and also I was willing to put in the time to understand what I'm looking at. So, artificial intelligence. The Ruby files, I call them that because that's my last name, and I want to be clear that my work is different than the other work that's going on. What's most interesting to me is that Republicans and conservatives for many years now have been saying that social media companies, big tech, censors on the right. However, this is actual definitive proof, depending on how you view the data, that actually, yes, Twitter data scientists and their Meta team, they actually did deploy natural language processing and machine learning to censor specific terms or arrays of terms as quote unquote detections. So what are some of those words that they used? Well, they use words like Trump 2024, voter fraud. They use the American flag emoji. So what they said is that these terms in correlation with each other were deemed US political misinformation. And there was also a bunch of COVID stuff as well. But if you used all of these terms in correlation with each other, that builds out a word vector or some sort of NLP on the back end, and then it's constantly training on that. We know the term guilty by association, but what people don't realize is what that means with certain words. And people understand back in the 1990s, traditional search engine optimization keywords. But this is a whole other level. And people have really mischaracterized what I'm trying to report here, which is that these are not just regular keywords, they're entities. Entities are more than keywords. They're relationships to each other, and they are fed into training data. Now, of course, there's a human on the other end of that, and that human has to determine what to put into that list of detections in the first place. And so when we talk about political algorithmic bias, the goal here to really look at is, did Twitter have political algorithmic bias? Was that word list of detections for NLP evenly distributed on the right and on the left? And I put out that data on Twitter, and I said to people, you be the judge. I'm not going to tell you what to think. You tell me what you think. That is the 360 overview of my work to date.
Well said. I think it's
Well
very
said indeed.
Ben, it's very telling. I keep on saying, but Ben's an actual journalist for people that are not familiar with this. Ben has done a lot of investigative journalism. He helped bring down Michael Milken, which I brought up on the show, and he's done a lot of investigative work. This story wasn't dumped on your lap like it was these other journalists. And I keep on saying, Ben, that they've gotten the Twitter files, but they haven't done anything with them. They haven't actually gone to Adam Schiff and said, why were you trying to go against people? And Ben, that to me would be journalism, wouldn't it be? Or am I?
Well, I would say if they could find out that the people in charge were refusing to release these files, and that the files more than likely contained something which was humiliating, embarrassing, or held some very important persons up to contempt.
Well said. And it's also really important, just so people understand what Kris is also revealing, is that this wasn't done just to people with big names. This was done, Ben, to people that had under 10,000 followers. And you being the mathematician you are, if you add up the small accounts, they far outweigh even the biggest of accounts. So it's sort of a sleight of hand trick, Ben Stein. They're saying, oh, we went after the big accounts, is what Kris is saying, but it's the small accounts that really got damaged, Ben.
Well, I wonder if we could prove that, and then that would, I say, be our starting point. And from that, if we could find out that certain very big names conspired to harm smaller names, we would be really off and running for something quite important.
Well, Kris actually has. That's the data you say you have.
I asked them, who did you work with to create these arrays of word detection lists? And they said they worked with Trust and Safety, they worked with the CDC, and they worked with other government agencies.
I'm sorry, what was the first one?
Yoel Roth's division. So that was one.
Yoel Roth worked for Twitter. He was the gatekeeper, Ben.
I want to share something. The source is liberal. This is not a traditional whistleblower story because they were proud of the work they did. I think part of the reason this came out is because the narrative that the Twitter files were presenting, many feel ruins their legacy of the work that they did. When people describe content moderation, they're leaving out some of the nuance that's involved in the content moderation. And that if you have on that team of data scientists is liberal, which they said they were all Democrats, there was no ideological diversity of someone saying, wait a second, 2000 Mules, for example, it was a movie about supposed election fraud. That's on the list. My Pillow is on the list.
Wait,
right?
what's My Pillow? Oh, about that guy who makes the pillows?
Yeah, so he was in the NLP. People are very focused on generative AI, things like Midjourney or these shiny objects where you put in some words and you get these amazing, fun images. They're not necessarily seeing that this could also be perhaps the greatest threat to the future of language and speech in this country. We are very behind China when it comes to AI. And I don't know if Ben wants to jump in on that too, but we are. And we're just focused on the wrong thing. So instead of getting more people to enlist in data science in America, the people that we do have are too busy flagging the American flag emoji.
I must say, you are so far ahead of me in terms of what you're saying and in terms of what I am understanding that I hardly know where to begin. Are you telling me that there is a group of people who have files on other people, and that if those files were released, those people, the smaller group of people who are less well-to-do or have a smaller number of followers, would find that their lives were ruined?
I have files that show that for specific accounts under 10,000, just a small data set, I don't have the exhaustive list. It went up until October 2022. And those files show the detection list of specific words that were used to trigger the algorithm of machine learning that Twitter was using up until that date of what they deemed words to be US political misinformation. And that's the smoking gun in all of this. Is voter fraud, for example, regardless of where you stand on it, based on this data, Twitter clearly said that this is US political misinformation. If you're talking about Dominion, if you're talking about voting machines, if you're talking about Trump, if you're talking about 2000 Mules or American flag emojis, all of these words together trigger their algorithm to say that this is an account that is tweeting possible US political misinformation. Do you find any of that to be political misinformation?
I don't really, I have to say you lost me quite a while ago. I don't understand what the hell is going on here? Okay, so we found out that you have a number of files that have the names of people, some important, some not particularly important. But do we know what's in the files? I mean, do you have any idea what the files are doing?
I do.
You do. What kind of things are they doing?
Would it be helpful, Judah, if I shared my screen and brought any of this up from?
I think it would be very helpful.
Whatever helps Ben.
Okay, so let me see if I can pull some stuff up for you, and then I'll show you examples of the files from my public Twitter feed of what some of this stuff looks like.
That'd be very kind of you.
Really, what you're talking about is how social media companies like Twitter, and I know this is true of Facebook because Mark Zuckerberg has testified several times before the Senate and the House about how Facebook is attempting to use machine learning and artificial intelligence to prevent the dissemination of so-called hate speech before it can even be posted. I think the social media companies are moving fairly far along in identifying words that they consider to be dangerous, and that they would use artificial intelligence rather than human moderators to either eliminate or suppress disfavored speech.
Everything you just said is correct. I think they use a combination of them. So you can start, here's where, okay, like deep state. So these are called engrams. It's a term in machine learning. So you can see, these are all examples. AG, you can see all the different ways they're spelling it. Perfect example. America first, American, anything like with the USA in it, I noticed was flagged, which is just really very strange. Why is that a concern? Why is that what they're looking for? This one may be of interest to you, Ben. Do you see all these ballot boxes, ballot fraud, all of this? Twitter's machine learning was detecting as US political misinformation. So they're drawing a line in the sand and saying, if you are on Twitter with an account with under 10,000 followers and you are talking about ballot fraud, we are picking up and detecting any tweet that does that. And they won't necessarily remove it, but it's going to then be triggered and gone to human review.
That's a pretty broad brush of terms, right? I mean, ballot fraud could be anything.
Correct.
But
yes.
So then once those terms have been flagged, however that works, then human content moderators take a look at the tweets.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Exactly what you said. And actually, a data scientist brought up the point that you made, which is that someone asked the question for me that I had to Elon Musk in a Twitter space, which is, what do you think about Twitter's AI? And he said, I wouldn't even call it AI. It was very primitive in nature. Another data scientist who reviewed this also said it was primitive in nature, probably for the reason that you're saying, because what you're saying, that casting this wide net is widely problematic if you think about it.
Sure.
Right. The engrams, because you could be saying ballot fraud never happened or ballot fraud did happen. How are they determining the difference?
Right. Or ballot drop boxes are secure and safe. Right.
Then suppose we know that Joe Smith wrote an article about ballot stuffing or ballot box, something to do with ballot boxes. How do we know that this is in some way harmful or a violation of the First Amendment or in some way destructive of the Constitution?
That's a really good question. So do you mean, how do we know that the content, the text, the clean text of that tweet is harmful, the content?
Yeah. Right. Why do we give a damn about it?
Why do we care about it?
Yeah, why do we care?
Well, because this is, Ben, this is a massive, this is what got Trump got elected in the first place, was via social media. So people are not able to spread information that's pertinent to elections, that's pertinent to so many things, to go to something that obviously with elections, but to go to the Supreme Court's decision, how many people were blocked and how many people were tagged for being pro-life and pro-choice.
So what you're saying to us is that you found a whole bunch of files from various Americans saying you're talking about abortion and you're anti-abortion, and therefore we're not going to run your whatever it is you want us to
Exactly.
run.
They will suppress your views, the amount of views you have, the amount of people that could see it.
Well, but it's worse than that, because the significance of the Twitter files story that Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss and Michael Schellenberger
And Glenn Greenwald.
have been releasing, the significance of all of that, Ben, is that the FBI and the CIA and the Centers for Disease Control and a number of other government agencies were in regular, practically daily contact with executives at Twitter that we know for sure. And we can probably safely guess that they were in regular contact with executives at other companies as well, and alerting them to posts or tweets that the federal government considered possible disinformation, and that therefore these government agencies were encouraging Twitter, for certain, and other companies to censor those people. And that's where it becomes the constitutional question. That's where it becomes an issue of the government urging, encouraging, pressuring, inviting these private companies to do what the federal government cannot and must not do, which is violate people's freedom of speech.
Yes, it's an argument indeed. So we have very much an argument. So now we're showing that these big tech companies are using their power and their ability to spy on people to keep those people from entering the public square, so to speak, the marketplace of ideas, and talk about issues that are important to them. Is that correct?
I don't know that I'd call it spying as much. Well, I think so. There's a distinction with the other Twitter file that work that Ben's referring to shows something else. I'm focused on the tech and the AI, and I think the other work is focused on government oversight or overreach. And so two very different things. I don't know that I call it spying as much as I would call it redirecting speech. And this is a real concern. There's a difference between flagging keywords versus training a model in machine learning, which is what's happening right now. Adobe, for example, people were pretty angry last night, where they've automatically opted people in now to be part of, anytime you're using their service, to be part of their training set, to improve on their machine learning. This is going to be a really important story over the next 5 years that people don't really understand what that means.
I understand it. I think if I understand it correctly, it is that your entities, and we're upset about and worried about, are suppressing free speech by potentially a very large number of people. Even if it's not a very large number of people, any is too many. Any is too many.
It's an absolutely terrifying story. And Ben, just so you know, the Department of Homeland Security went to her website. She's able to track who goes to her website. And the Department of Homeland Security actually did a check on her website.
What does that mean?
Well, they were actually probably investigating. They probably are doing investigations on her right now. I mean, why else would the Department of Homeland Security go to any of our website, go to any of us? There's no need. And
so have you found out what they were looking for?
It was a link I could see that they clicked from Twitter to my website of my company, rubymediagroup.com in Westchester County, New York. This is what they're focused on, looking at my website and reading my article. Great that they read my article. I don't know what to make of it. I think the whole thing's a little bit weird. I think they could be spending their time on certainly bigger issues than this, but there's also a media blackout on this. The Twitter files tells a story of what happened to much larger accounts. And their first screenshot shows that. If you looked at the libs of TikTok screenshot, it literally says, do not take action on this account. The story here is that someone like libs of TikTok could possibly talk about 2,000 mules and be fine. And that gives the illusion of free speech. Whereas if I have 300 followers and I talk about 2,000 mules, I can't. That's ridiculous. That's saying what's good for you is not good for me.
And essentially, that's what she has. Yes. She has the files that it's not against the big boys or the big girls. It's the more damage that's being done is to the people, with most people who have 100 or 200 or 300 followers, they can't get their information out. Yes. What they're sharing isn't having any broadband. Nobody is getting it. And that's a very dangerous thing. Ben, it's like when we were on YouTube and we had shows banned because of election when we would discuss election fraud or we would discuss the vaccine. It wasn't about the numbers. It was the keywords that we were using that they shut us down. It wasn't like somebody was sitting at home reporting us. It was a machine that was reporting us, to the point that even after we had stopped putting shows up on YouTube for a year, they still pulled episodes, Ben, about election fraud.
I see it. I see it. It's blood curdling. And I wonder what can be done about it now. You said there's going to be a lawsuit about it. Well, we know that the courts are very reluctant to, as they say, go into the political thicket. So what will happen?
I don't think anything will happen. I think absolutely nothing will happen. No, I'm serious. I really think nothing's going to happen. I think the media really doesn't want to cover a lot of what's going on with any of this. But I just want to give another example, because we understand the text-based example that I just showed about 2,000 mules. But now let's take it to audio on this conversation on Zoom. So let's say that Zoom has allegedly, I don't know this to be true or not, but if Zoom decides to start upping their machine learning resources and model, and they start training on the speech that we just had in this conversation, what if they're detecting for certain words in this? And then afterwards, Judah gets an email saying, we've suspended your account because you use certain words. That's exactly what was going on at Twitter, except people didn't know. This is going to have wide-reaching consequences above and beyond anything that went on Twitter. And that's what I'm trying to let people know.
Well, Judy, so then have you contacted Larry Klayman and asked him to file a lawsuit about this?
I'm very worried for Kris's sake about the files that she has, with the legal issues and the legal ramifications of what she has. She was given them. It wasn't like Elon Musk released and the data dump. So she does need to find out from lawyers. But in Kris's biggest defense, I could tell you 100% she has these files. I'm not sure if she's allowed to. So yes, people are being reached out to answer your question, Ben Stein, of whether
Judah Friedman,
of what she can do with this. And if you just tuned in, you are listening to The World According to Ben Stein. I got to tell you, Kris, that diagram you showed us was, as Ben said, blood curdling. And I am amazed with your ability to be able to do that on the spot. I can't even Google.
Yeah, I'm very impressed.
I'm very impressed. And I can't even Google and show the screen.
The only way to change this moving forward is that you have more political diversity in the people who choose the detections and the word lists and the people who program machines in machine learning. There's no balance right now. The solution is there is not a vibrant political Republican Party in big tech making these decisions. They're just not.
Yes, that's a point that we all could. Ben, to her point is we don't have any. We don't own Google. We don't own YouTube.
No, we don't. But we have people who are willing to speak out and challenge the big bosses.
I think what separates Republicans from Democrats is they have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to tech right now. I'm going to be honest with you. This entire past few weeks has been a disappointing experience in general to see the lack of conservatives even asking a single question about anything I shared. Instead, they just want to talk about screenshots of private emails rather than hard data and evidence. So tell me where the discourse is with the Republicans. I'm just not seeing it when it comes to tech.
And you're right. We are light years behind in the Republican Party when it comes to tech. I know it's hard for you right now, Kris, and I know what you're going through, but Ben Stein has been through what you're going through right now 1,000-fold. And he's made it through and he's survived. Ben had enough balls to go up against Richard Dawkins, which nobody has. And I get it. It's an uphill battle and we're there with you. Quadruple B has writers that write stuff that not popular among intelligentsia, but she's a brilliant writer and she's willing to go. So you're not alone on this. Quadruple B even asked me for your email address during the show. And that's how interested he has. So you have allies. So you're not alone. And on that note, I want to thank everybody for that's going to be watching this later because of our technical difficulties. I blame it on Kris because they're suppressing Kris Ruby because she's on our show.
I think so.
Just so happens that we went down on the night Kris Ruby was on. But I got to tell you, your diagrams were absolutely brilliant. And I'm so impressed that you were able to bring them up and show them up. Kris, tell people where they can find you quickly.
You can find me at Sparkling Ruby on Twitter or rubymediagroup.com. And thank you for having me on and for covering real news on this show.
It has been our pleasure.
Seriously. Thank you, Ben Stein, who you can find them at spectator.org.